Good afternoon, everyone. Just a second um, to allow you guys to come in. But even as we do that, for those of you guys that are joining us for the first time, my name is Garba Esiahaya, and I'm the training coordinator of the Temple Small Business Development Center. The Temple Small Business Development Center helps small businesses start and grow. We offer free one-on-one consulting on a variety of low to no cost webinars. We are proud to be part of the nationally accredited network of the Small Business Development Center, which has over 1,000 networks across the state. You are here this afternoon for a webinar on podcasting series, where to put your podcast discussing content platform. A copy of the PowerPoint and a link to the recording will be sent to all the attendees. However, as usual, being a webinar, all the attendees have been muted. However, we always encourage you to drop your question on the Q&A or the chat box. Without further ado, please allow me to welcome our speaker, even as he takes over the floor for the presentation. Mr. Steven, you're welcome.
Thank you, Garba. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us again for our final segment in the Podcasting for Business series here at the Temple University Small Business Development Center. I am your guide for this conversation, and why don't we jump right in? We're going to talk today about the question of platforms. One of the things that most people want to know about is how do I host my podcast? What do I do to get things going? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, finding a home for your podcast. On the screen that I'm sharing with you, you'll see three of the popular podcast hosting platforms, Libsyn or Liberated Syndication, Blueberry, and the third one is really remember. I put it up there today. It's well, anyway, we're going to talk through them. I've got some examples of the actual podcast platform. The first thing I want to talk about is the question of why you need to use a content distribution platform for your podcast. When you create an audio file or a video file as a podcast, it's a fairly large file, and those files tend to accumulate and they take up a lot of space. If you have a web host that is hosting your website for your business, you are probably allocated a certain amount of space on that web host for the pages associated with your website. And if you start using that space to put your podcast files, the actual audio or video files, and then serve out links to them, you're very likely to run out of space fairly quickly on your web server. These sites are not optimized for streaming delivery. They're mainly designed to host static pages or a WordPress database or something like that that's delivering up very, very small files, relatively speaking, for your website so that people can see what's on it. What you want to do for your content, for your audio and video, is to choose a content distribution network. And this is simply a platform like a web hosting company, except that its primary purpose is for the hosting of audio and video files. And these content distribution networks are specifically designed for that purpose. They provide you with the tools to upload the files, and they generate the links and the code that you need to embed the video or audio file into your website in a way that other people can play it and listen to it. And they also provide tools that allow you to submit your audio and video to the various podcast directories like Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. They are optimized for the streaming concept, so people can listen to your files with a fairly smooth experience if they are listening to it from a player that's embedded on your site. So that's the main reason you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to go into a podcast content distribution network. And what I'd like to do at this point is actually take you on a tour of some of the popular content distribution networks. First thing I'm going to do is share to you a browser where I have put up a bunch of podcast hosts. Okay, so the first page we're looking at is a review of the best podcast hosting sites of 2022. It's a review by a fellow by the name of Adam Enfroy, and I'll put the link to this page in the chat so that you can go ahead and put it in your notes if you like. But this is a really good review of a lot of the different sites that are available. He gives high marks to Buzzsprout, which we'll take a look at. And of course, some of the others are Spreaker, RSS, Transistor, Podbean, and the ones that I've mentioned to you. So let's take a quick look at all of them. I'm going to start with the one that I use typically, which is called Liberated Syndication, or Libsyn. And you're getting a handout with some of these listed and the URLs, so you don't necessarily have to worry about getting the URL right now, but it's libsyn.com. And basically with Libsyn, what you have is a platform that lets you upload the files. And if you don't have a website, the nice thing about all of these platforms is they will create a web presence for your podcast on their system. Depending on the package that you decide to subscribe to, you'll have more robust or less robust capabilities. But broadly speaking, you'll have a page where you can host your podcast. So let's take a quick look at how this would work. Now, what we're looking at here is actually the dashboard of my Libsyn account. And you'll see that it's looking at some statistics for some of the podcasts that we host there. And at the current time, we're only hosting a couple of podcast programs. In the past, we've provided hosting for a number of our different clients, but as the podcasting world has matured, they've decided to take on that hosting process themselves. So we don't necessarily have to host them on our platform. One of the nice things about the Libsyn platform, and I describe it in the notes that you'll be receiving, is that you can actually choose a level of membership. And let's go back to the beginning, to the pricing, so that you can get an idea. So for Libsyn, there are several different levels of pricing, and depending on how much you spend, that determines how much monthly storage is allocated to you for your podcast. And typically for a finished podcast, you're probably going to need 1 to 2 megabytes per minute of the finished podcast. So think in terms of, a 30-minute podcast is probably going to be about a 30 megabyte file. Some folks will encourage you to create your podcast files at a lower bit rate. That means that it's sampling the sound at a lower level, and it's a quality trade-off. Okay, if you do it at a lower bit rate, you're going to get a smaller file, but the quality of the sound will suffer. And when you get to the point where it starts to be painful for the ears to hear the trade-off in sound, you've gone too far in making this file smaller. We tend to like to put our files as close as possible to CD quality. So we're talking about 128K on the bit size, the speed of the file. And that gives you a larger file. So you have to take that into account when you're figuring out what your plan should be. Now, the nice thing about Libsyn is they let you ratchet your plan up or down on a monthly basis. You can do it in real time, and they just make an adjustment in the pricing and prorate it at that point. But what happens with Libsyn that I have always liked is you get a monthly storage allocation. Let's say you're on the $15 plan that's sort of in the middle here. You get 324 megabytes of storage, and that resets every month. And what happens then is at the end of the month, all of your episodes that you posted that month remain available. They just move to an archive situation on the Libsyn servers. They're not archived where they can't be accessed. They just move them to a different server, and the allocation that you have for your monthly storage is reset to the 324, and you just keep going and keep adding files. As long as you keep your subscription active, your podcast files will always be available. And you can see that there are various features that are associated with this, the different levels here. And one of them that's most important to everybody is the Apple Podcast Compliant RSS. And what that means is if you put your files on Libsyn, they're going to generate an RSS feed. We talked about that in earlier programs. That's the feed that tells Apple where your podcast is and gives it some information about it in a structured way so that Apple can populate the fields in its database with the title of your podcast, the author of the podcast, the descriptive information, your image, your logo for your podcast, and so forth and so on, and put it into the Apple Podcasts app in a way that other people can find it. So that's kind of important. That's probably, the principal thing that most people want is to get into Apple. And that makes it also compatible with all of the other podcast platforms because they all are using the same RSS feed. You're not limited in your audience. Some of the podcast hosts will give you a lower cost of entry, but they will charge you for bandwidth. And what that means is if you end up having a very popular podcast, um, you may incur additional costs because the more people who download the podcast, the more bandwidth you're using for that podcast on that platform. And so you really want to consider whether that's something you want to be worrying about. If you have a podcast that may become really popular, you want to look for a platform probably where you're not paying for the bandwidth that you use. Libsyn, which I use, and full disclosure, and I'm not getting any money from them for this, they do not have a bandwidth requirement. And the same is true on the Blueberry host. Blueberry without the .com is another podcast host which has a similar approach to Libsyn. You can host here relatively free, and they will give you the hosting account. They will give you 30 days to try it out, and they have several different levels as well. The standard plan is 100 megabytes of storage, and the advanced plan is 250 megabytes. And again, they're not charging you for the bandwidth, but they are allowing you to create a site for your podcasts. The other thing that these sites are very good at doing is allowing you to create what's called an embedded player. Let's take a look at that for a minute, because that can be important too. So if you are creating a podcast, episode. So this is a typical episode. And what you can do with this is once you put an episode up on the content site, is you can either use the direct download URL, which you see here, and put that into a player app or into WordPress, and it will recognize that as an audio file, and actually WordPress will create a player around it just by you embedding this text into your WordPress blog post. The other way that you can do it, of course, is to create an embedded player. Now, the embedded player, and I'm looking for the up here at the top in the upper right-hand corner is the embed button, and what that will do is open up this screen where you can customize this player with various things. You can add a logo, you can change the color, you can make the size large or small. You can do a lot of different things with it. And then the other thing you can do is capture the code. And what it's done here is it's copied the code that's necessary to generate this image of this player in whatever web page you want to put it in. And so if I paste this into the chat, you're going to see some code that would, if you put this into a web page, this code would actually create the player that you're looking at on the screen. And then once you save the page and you open it in your browser, someone visiting that page would see this player. And that can be a very convenient way to create a player in your site because, again, as I've said in some of the earlier episodes of this presentation, the goal is not to go viral. The goal is to help change people's behavior or their impression of your organization. If you're a business doing podcasting for business purposes, you want to keep people on your website and make it as convenient as possible for them to consume your content. And so from that perspective, embedding a player on your website that people can just click on and open another tab and go on and do their other work while they're listening to your program. That seems to be a good idea. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to get the content. You don't want to ask them to click away to somewhere else. And so keeping them on the site is always what we try to do. So that's embedding, and this is available from all of these podcast hosts. You can do it on Blueberry as well. We have a Blueberry account because we do some work with a client who chose to use Blueberry. And what you see is a little bit similar to Libsyn, but there are some differences, and you have to really find out from the look and feel of what makes sense for you, where you want to create your podcasts and where you want them to land. Blueberry has an interface that's a little bit simpler than Libsyn, and they walk you through the process. You simply click create a new episode, and then you would fill in the title of the episode here, and you would then fill in some show notes in this box, and you have some formatting tools that you can use to format the notes and add hyperlinks to the notes. There are some advanced options you can use if you want to customize how the episode appears on Apple. You can make some customizations here. But if you set up Apple as a podcast destination for your feed on Blueberry before you start posting, you don't need to enter any information in here. It'll be handled automatically. And then over here, you see a button, Upload Episode File, and you simply click that, and you can either drag or select the file and upload it. And once it's uploaded, you then have the option of scheduling the release of that program to your feed or releasing it immediately. By default, as you can see, episodes are published immediately here. There are ways to set the destination for the show on Blueberry. So you can set some default destinations here a lot easier than you can on some of the other platforms like Libsyn. You put in the URL that you're given when you submit your podcast to Apple. And by the way, these sites will help walk you through the process of submitting your podcast. So there are step-by-step instructions, and once you do it correctly, Apple will deliver a URL that looks something like this. And then you just copy and paste that into this field, and it will automatically update your Apple podcasts whenever you publish a new episode. So no further work is necessary. The same thing here for Google Podcasts, for Spotify, Amazon Music, Android, and there are multiple others that you can submit to as well. So that makes it really, really easy for podcasters to just, publish once and distribute to many. And that's really the purpose overall of using these content distribution platforms. Another one that's popular is Stitcher. It's really not a place where you can upload your podcasts directly, but you can use your RSS feed to get them into Stitcher. And Stitcher does limit the number of podcast episodes that are visible if you don't have a premium account. So you want to look into whether it makes sense to get a premium account. Just a second. Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout is a little bit like the others. They're all pretty much the same, but different look and feel for all of them. Buzzsprout is attractive to a lot of people because you can upload 2 hours each month. And if you're not doing a lot of episodes, if you're doing 4 half-hour episodes a month, that should be enough, right? The only drawback there is with the free account, the episodes are only available for 90 days, and then they go away. And that may not be a good thing for the podcast series that you want to produce. You may want to have all your episodes available. And remember, we said in earlier episodes, people don't come to podcasts necessarily in the order that they are produced. A lot of podcasts will say, welcome to our podcast. This is episode 32. And they number the episodes, which is fine to do. It's fun to do, but see how many episodes you've done. But people don't necessarily listen to them in that order. They might listen to number 32 and say, hey, that's great. Let me go back and listen to number 2 and number 5 and number 7. So if they're numbered, you may be discouraging people from listening to them because they think they have to listen to them in order. But you may want to keep your content available all the time, and that's why you want to consider having a hosting plan that you pay for. whatever level of service you think is appropriate for you, whether it's by the number of hours each month or the size of the files each month. You need to pick something that's maybe a little bit higher than what you're normally producing as you see what your production schedule is, so that you never run up against a limit where you're, on deadline, you have to get an episode uploaded and it won't let you because you don't have a big enough account. You don't have enough allocated storage. So you don't want to be in that situation. Let me just take a stop for a minute and see if anybody has any questions. Do we have any questions in the chat? Let's see. Looking for Zoom. We don't have any questions in the chat. If anybody wants to ask any, please put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A and we'll talk about them from there. So let's move on to one of the others. Garba, did you get any questions? I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Okay. So let me take a look over. So Spreaker is another one that is similar to the others. And again, there's pricing and there are different features associated with them. One of the things that the podcast platforms kind of push on you is the ability to manage advertising campaigns. As we've said before, that's less important to a business-to-business podcast because you're probably not going to find advertisers who find your podcast gets enough downloads, enough listens to make it worth their while to produce an advertisement. You may be able to just, if you have a local advertiser who gives you a few bucks towards a sponsorship message in your podcast, you may be able to just do that on your own in the normal recording process, and you might not need that particular feature in order to do your advertising. So don't be smitten by the advertising, what do they call it? The advertising campaign manager. Priority support may be a good thing. If you have a problem and you need to talk to someone, if you're not paying for the right level of service, you may be restricted to just email support. So if you have some other way of getting support, that could be a good thing. One of the other things that is important to a lot of podcast producers is the statistics, and that is something that you generally are going to pay for. To get more detailed statistics, you are going to have to pay for a subscription, and depending on how much detail you want, it's going to be a higher level of either professional account or premier service, something like that, where they give you very, very detailed information. So as you can see here, we're getting very detailed information on the performance of 9 episodes. We're getting the number of people listening today and in the last 30 days. We can look at trends over the past 30 days, and we haven't released a new episode since the 31st. We just released a new episode on March 1st. And you can look at the actual episode downloads and see how they're doing. The one at the top is just released yesterday, the day before. And then the others, as you can see, get varying levels of listens. And you can actually drill into these things with much greater depth than is available if you don't have the advanced analytics. We can see where our listeners are coming from, and it looks like we're getting some from Europe and all over the world. And so that's kind of cool. You also need to know, this is useful information, to know what devices people are using to access the podcast. And that can be useful so that you optimize your content so that it's relevant to the people who are accessing. So for example, if mobile apps are the primary way that people are getting your information, you may want to skew the content of your podcast in a way that refers people to easily accessible mobile locations rather than giving them long URLs for a web browser, even though in this case it looks like 36% of our listeners are listening through a web browser. A very small number of people are looking at it on a tablet. Most people are listening to it on their smartphones, it would appear. So that can be helpful to know. And that's really, the kind of thing that business podcasters want to know about their program, what's going on. When we look at the trends, we can look at daily trends, or we can look at monthly trends. We can look at the past 2 years, would not be too relevant since we just launched this podcast last August. But over the past 12 months, you can see some very steady growth in the number of listens, which is really nice. The client's going to be very happy with that. And that's the kind of thing that you would get. And it's very similar in Libsyn. There are statistics here as well. Obviously, for these podcasts, because we're not doing the same kind of podcasting on Libsyn, the numbers may be a little bit different, perhaps a little bit lower. We have one primary program that is posted on this particular feed. It's an interview show, and it does do fairly well. It's doing about 200 to 300 downloads, and that's useful information for the client. And again, if you want to drill down into these statistics, you can simply click on the name of the episode, and it will bring you the information about where it's actually coming from. You can see we're getting a little bit of international visibility as well. It's not very large. It's mostly United States, but it is interesting to see that. And we see pretty clearly that people are downloading it when it comes out. We typically release this podcast on the Friday of every week, Friday morning, and that's kind of when people are accessing it. These things do have a long tail. It's not easily visible, but over a very long period of time, you'll see that there's a steady stream of 3 or 4 downloads a week for older podcasts. And it's important to manage the expectations of the folks that you're working with when you're building a business podcast. If you're working for a small business and you need to tell the boss what's going on, you need to manage their expectations about how long it will take before you get a significant number of listens on your podcast, because it doesn't automatically happen because you have listed a podcast. There are literally tens of millions of podcasts with new ones being launched every day. So you are going to be competing in a very big ocean. Let's take a look at one of the other newer platforms that's just come out is rss.com. And again, this is one that is offering different levels of pricing. And it all depends on what your needs are. Some of them are offering very low monthly rates, which are pretty good. And then there are enterprise level professional accounts for very, very large numbers of downloads. Almost no one is going to get to 10,000 downloads, at least on this call. And if you do, God bless, that's fantastic. But typically, as we've said in earlier episodes, the number of downloads is not a reflection of your podcast being unpopular. It's a reflection of the universe that's available of listeners who are interested in your topic. And as long as you're hitting your topic and hitting the right audience, it doesn't have to be large. If they're passionate about what you do, if they're interested in your business, services, or products, that's the audience that you want to be reaching for and engaging with, and making sure that they keep coming back for more content. And that's what helps them make the content interesting, make it relevant to them by making it interesting. Another newer site for people to post podcasts on is Transistor. And again, you really have to just compare these prices and features to see what makes sense. They're saying unlimited podcasts at $19 a month. And if you compare that to like what Libsyn is doing, just out of curiosity, see if I can at the beginning. So for example, Libsyn, if you sign up for $5 a month, you're getting 162 megs of storage. And here it's $19 at the bottom level, and you're getting unlimited. For most people, 162 megabytes might be almost unlimited. And certainly, if $15 a month, 300 megabytes, you're probably not going to use up unless you're doing a daily podcast of half an hour. So, you need to do some comparison shopping and see what makes the most sense for you. But again, it's also about look and feel. It's about, do I like the way this program works? Do I like the way this website lets me upload things? You know, and here they're giving you a comparison of their pricing against some of the other competitors. You can take a look at transistor.fm and see if that makes any sense. And it's really the personal feel. You know, it's sort of like buying a daily planner. You know, it's when Microsoft got everybody into Outlook, a lot of people resisted using the calendar because they had a way of doing their calendar that they liked, that they were comfortable with. And that's not necessarily the way Outlook works. So the same thing is true with these platforms. You want to do it in a way that is most comfortable for you, has the right features for you, and has enough space allocation for you to upload that you don't run out of space when you're doing your program. So with that, I'm going to hit the chat and see what people say. So Tamara Lynn, who is back with us, although podcasts are popular now, is there any industry buzz about an emerging technology or platform that may become popular in the future? Do you see a day when podcasts may go the way of 8-track tape, or do you think they'll remain popular? Oh, I think that podcasts are going to remain popular. I think there's always going to be some new thing that people try. One of the newer trends that we're seeing right now has been this idea of what I would call audio snacking, or it's sort of like taking hot takes, excerpts from a podcast, and repurposing a short audio clip or video clip in a way that it can be shared on social media so that it will generate some buzz or some attention for that particular podcast. I think the problem with that is, you know, the short attention span and the um, ability to just edit these little segments. People don't tend to go from there to watch the whole thing. Um, I think that, you know, it's fleeting. There have been several different startups that have tried to do the audio excerpt thing, and some have gone away already. Some new ones have popped up. There are new ways to do it. Many of these content platforms that we've been talking about offer you ways to create little excerpts that you can use on your social media. One of the things that we didn't, and about podcasts going the way of 8-track tape, I'm going to say never. Podcasts are a really good portable way of providing people with information that they can multitask. Because again, you know, it's like a radio show. And I would say most of us are listening to some kind of audio content while we are doing other work, whether we're listening to a radio station or a streaming site playing music or a podcast. We're listening to something usually, unless we're editing a podcast, in which case it's a little hard to listen to something else. But for the most part, we're doing these things and we're looking for interesting content. Most of us want to hear something different. We get tired of listening to whether it's a cable news channel or a radio station that's playing the same songs constantly. We want to see something different. We want to hear something different. And so I think with the incredible diversity of podcasts that are out there, there's always something new to challenge you, to make you think, for you to listen to. So I think that, you know, it's around for a long time. And also the barriers to entry are so low now for people to create a podcast and even perhaps to have one that becomes hugely popular. It can start with something as simple as talking about a favorite hobby. And if you find other people who are engaged in that hobby as passionately as you are, you may become, you know, the next podcast celebrity for that particular hobby. It's very competitive. There are a lot of people out there and a lot of self-promoters who are very successful at engaging with audiences in different niches. And a woman at a podcasting seminar many years ago once said, the narrower your niche, the more you grow rich. And I took that to heart because if you stay in your lane and you become an expert at the things that you're an expert at, people value that. And a podcast is one way for you to convey that knowledge and expertise so that those people will say, hey, I think that's someone I want to learn more about and maybe even do business with. I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about video platforms. We didn't really talk about video platforms too much. Most of you are probably well aware of and probably use the most popular video platform, which is this one, YouTube. And, YouTube is wonderful. Everybody uses it. There's a lot of cool stuff on it. And certainly there's a lot of informational videos about how to do things. And if you ever get stuck doing something or figuring out a process or learning how to cook some particular kind of food, there's always a how-to video on YouTube that you can turn to. And in fact, people will say that YouTube is the second most used search engine after Google. Well, it's owned by Google, of course, so that kind of makes sense. But people do search on YouTube. The thing is, what they're searching for is not necessarily for your video that will solve their business problem or give them a solution. What they're searching for is how-to videos, like I said, or funny things to watch. And there's plenty of that on YouTube. You can see Lewis Black in the second row of these videos. He's a comedian who's often on Saturday Night Live and on The Daily Show. He's very, very funny. He's very not safe for office work. So you want to have earphones on when you're playing Lewis Black's videos. But that's the kind of thing that people are searching for on YouTube. And what happens is a business video tends to get lost. And that's why we kind of prefer Vimeo. Vimeo.com is where we post videos for our clients. And then just like with the audio platforms, you can create embed code and place a player into a website that actually pulls up the video. What's nice about Vimeo is it's extremely professional looking. It lets you customize the players. And most importantly, when you're at the end of a YouTube video that you've sent people to, YouTube tends to show you recommended videos to watch next. And the problem I have with that is the videos tend to be based on the text around the video you just watched. So it'll pull keywords from the text that you put on your video to describe it, the title and so forth, the keywords, and it may pull up videos that are inappropriate for your audience. So for example, if you are let's say an insurance brokerage firm, and you are promoting your expertise in helping people write unique business risk policies, you may be inadvertently sending people to a recommendation for a video about how the person hates insurance agents, or videos that make fun of insurance brokers, or that make fun of insurance, or people who had a problem with an insurance company posting a long story about how terrible this particular experience was. And you really don't want to be in a position where you're serving up to your prospects and clients videos that reflect negatively on your industry. So from that perspective, I much prefer to use a platform like Vimeo. And there are some others that you can use, which are really designed for business use. And so what happens is, at the end of a video that's embedded using this platform, the video just ends. And they get the option to watch it again, but it just ends. And it doesn't send people to other irrelevant videos or videos that might be demeaning or negative about your business. So that's kind of the reason why we want to stay away from the YouTube thing. Multiple podcasts on a network. That's a great question. What about having multiple podcasts on a network? Actually, these sites like Libsyn and Blueberry all allow you to have multiple episodes. Now, one way to do it, or multiple shows, the best way to do it is actually sort of the model that we're using on Blueberry. And with Blueberry, we actually have a platform where we have multiple shows, essentially, and each show has its own dashboard. And you pay a little extra for that, and but it's well worth doing. And I kind of think of the ones that I've shown you, and I don't use a lot of them. We try to concentrate our podcast uploads to one or two sites. So Libsyn and Blueberry are the ones we're using. But I think that actually the dashboard on Blueberry, which was just upgraded a couple of months ago to its newest version, and Libsyn has a new version too that's a little similar, but it seems pretty easy to create multiple shows on the Blueberry platform, and then upload the episodes to them and make sure that they're all segregated and separated in the proper way. So definitely look into that, and you should be able to do that without any real difficulty. And the same is true again on Libsyn. You can do the same thing here. So let's log in just in fairness to them, since I use them as well. So for example, we have a main feed for our shows, and then you can add another feed and and that would be basically adding another network, another program, which would become part of the network. And then if you're going to do them all as part of the same branding umbrella, you may want to consider putting them all on the same feed. That would mean having an overarching feed, and then say this is the XYZ show, part of the ABC Podcast Network, and then have the ABC Podcast Network be the top level under which you hang these shows. So there's multiple ways to do it. If they're going to be separate, or if they're going to be the same. Under the same branding umbrella, Podbean is charging you per show. Yeah, I think they all will charge you something for multiple shows if they're on a different feed. So you want to take a look at that and see what the site is telling you, and you can compare them. You can actually ask their salespeople, their sales support people, what it would be for them. For Blueberry, I think they charge, for the professional platform, they're charging $100 a month, and then $10 per show that you add to the platform. So it's a little pricey for most people, but for the professional podcast producer who's running multiple shows for clients or for different divisions of a company, you may need to have that. You may be able to justify that. Garba, how are we doing?
Oh, we're good.
All right. We're going to take one last check for questions from folks. I'm going to have to leave you a little bit early today because I have to set up my studio here for a different production on a different channel with a different client. So anybody have any final questions before we wrap things up?
Yeah, sorry. Just a quick one before we get the next available question on board. I just want to draw the attention of our attendees that I just posted a 30-second survey about today's webinar. Remember, we at Tempo SPDC, we always cherish your feedbacks, even as it helps us to improve on the services we provide to you guys at no cost. So kindly take your 30 seconds and help us to fill out the survey.
Okay. So I want to thank everybody for being with us, and we do appreciate you taking the time. And if you have any questions or suggestions or need some help, I'm happy to be a resource. And let me just one last time, if you don't mind, I'll share my PowerPoint and give you my contact information on the screen. People attending this class can get a little discount on my book if they go to thebusinessofpodcasting.com and use the code that you see on the screen. You can get a hard copy of the book. And if you need to get in touch with me, there's the contact information. I'll leave that up on the screen for just a couple of minutes. And we thank you again for your time.
Yeah. Just want to use this opportunity to thank each and every one of you guys for keeping it a day with us. Mr. Steve, thank you for a wonderful presentation. And to my participant once again, thank you for all the questions that actually came up on board during the presentation. I think we are good.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Have a good one too. Bye-bye.